Lead balloons.
It's the alchemy of
Unpopular opinions. So,
whoops, I have somewhere to be. There's actually bourbon in this, so everyone knows.
Those things are very complicated, and
I don't know that I actually believe what I'm about to say.
spreading lies.
This critical culture that we live in.
Just to try to be an asshole.
Welcome, folks, to Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. And today we're doing the diet debate, contentious conjectures of the carnivore. So Trent, you are 100% defending a more carnivorous lifestyle, which means basically you despise the environment. Let's be honest. You support unethical treatment of defenseless animals and believe that most other life forms that aren't human beings are beneath you. You're an unrepentant murderer who, I don't know, you grind your molars on the sinews of baby lambs while blood drips down your chin. You've abandoned your conscience, and now you're literally a defender of meatheads. You meathead.
Wow. I mean, there's nothing I can disagree with in that opening statement there. Yeah. But on the other hand, there's you, right? High and mighty, more righteous than anybody as a plant-based sort of lifestyle advocate. You think meat eaters hate all things living. You think that meat eaters have wet dreams about their shotguns. You worship the god of broccoli and kale and lentil stew, red or yellow. You probably avoid stepping on ants. You probably you refuse to take antibiotics because they're anti-bio. I mean, I know how you are. I know how all people like you are. And I think that anything you're going to say is going to probably be stupid.
That's right, folks. You have dove into another Lead Balloons conversation between me and T-Dog Hunter. Now, obviously, Trent and I do not authentically feel ire for each other, but we're going to play a bit in this episode because we genuinely feel different about this topic. So we're going to debate it. A few disclaimers, though, okay? Right off the top. Trent, what's our first disclaimer?
Yeah, well, okay. So Joel and I, being theology guys with pastoral experience and stuff like that, we're not experts on this. Not experts. Joel and I have this in common.
I have eaten a lot of food. I have eaten a lot of food.
We eat multiple times a day. We're both curious about salient points on all sides. And also kind of I'm very interested in sports GOAT debates, and not necessarily because I think that they admit of a conclusion, but because they're kind of serve as like a mental gymnasium. They give you a chance to kind of clarify your thinking. I love seeing the way that people interact on these topics. I think it's a fascinating study.
Agreed,
Joel.
Secondly, we are still exploring. Trent and I, we don't feel like we've landed on any extraordinary conclusion, although we would like to play with some of the tropes and the straw men that our perspectives tend to throw out there and see what happens. I suspect, Trent, you're going to say something that I've never heard before and I find interesting and maybe even compelling. Probably vice versa as well.
Yeah, I think that's a certainty and a hope. A hope and a certainty. Yeah. Yeah.
So lastly, last disclaimer, we are coming to this debate with limited knowledge. And so we have data points, and we're just going to name those up front, and then we're going to get into the debate. So Trent, give me a summary of some of the data points you're coming to this debate with the carnivore, contentious conjectures of the carnivore debate.
Right. So some data points and some experiences in resources that give you kind of a sense of how I've come to this. So I just personally, what drove me to really learn more about nutrition and diet is I had a number of digestive issues starting kind of in high school that would kind of come and go, be worse and slightly better. over the years. And, I had multiple doctor visits trying to figure these things out. And I think one time I got an IBS diagnosis, and, I'd have doctors tell me, well, you eat more fiber, eat less spicy foods, eat lots of vegetables, avoid this and blah, blah, blah. And I really struggled with it. And it wasn't until probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and I heard that people were doing like carnivore diet. And so I looked into it and I tried it. I think I might have gone hardcore for like 2 or 3 days where I was just basically eating beef. And then I started doing more of a tapered off version. So I was maybe like 80% of my daily calories were coming from beef. And I tell you, man, I have never felt better in terms of like my digestion and clarity and calmness and energy levels and stuff. It really seemed to work for me. Now, have I been like a faithful carnivore diet person? Not even close. I do eat probably quite a bit more animal products than most people do. But certainly not like true. I don't eat exclusively meat, but when I'm focusing mainly on meat, I do tend to feel better. So that's my personal experience, and that's that's anecdotal. It's not really entering in as evidence in terms of sort of a randomized group, but it does tell you sort of where I'm coming from, and that particular thing has worked for me. As far as sort of my reading background, I don't think I really started reading a lot about like diet and nutrition until I really dove into trying to solve my problems. This is probably in my late 20s. But I read a book by a guy named Mark Hyman called Ultra Prevention, which was very good, kind of talking a lot about like vitamins and sources of illness and getting rid of like inflammation and these kinds of things. He has a whole chapter like dispelling health myths and these kinds of things. I thought it was quite good. I disagree with some of the stuff now, but I still think it's a good book, and it really helped me at the time. I read a book by John Douillard, who's he's more of a vegetarian guy. He's a kind of an Ayurvedic style. He's an MD, I believe, but kind of takes the Ayurvedic approach. And then one of the most interesting books that I read, this was back in 2018, is called The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz, in which she goes into a great discussion about the whole debate about saturated fats and how, starting like in the 1950s, the connection was made, or seemed to be made, between saturated fats and increased cholesterol and clogged arteries and heart disease and so forth. And she just kind of gives a whole story about that, and that was really fascinating. So, okay. As far as data points and sort of how I feel about this topic, let me say a few things. I am a firm believer that when it comes to nutrition studies, there's a near impossibility of establishing causation, because in order to say like certain food substance like beef or let's say lentils or something, in order to say that like this particular food substance produces a certain outcome, you have to be able to do a fairly long study with a randomized population in a controlled clinical environment. And you have to be darn sure that you're able to really isolate these variables so that they're not being affected by, one group that's not getting really good sleep, the other that is, and one group's exercising, the other isn't. So you have to be able to do this. These studies are expensive. They're susceptible to bias. They're also susceptible to confounding factors coming in. And so I think it's very, very difficult scientifically to say that a particular food, be it beef or be it something in a plant-based diet, that is causing something or preventing or not causing something. I think it's difficult to do that. Okay, so then the conclusion from that, I'm not making my full case for carnivore. We'll move into maybe some more of the nitty gritty here, but I think here's what I think when it really comes down to it. I think that people should experiment, and they should. There's plenty of time. If you live a full life, you can experiment. And I think people should eat what makes them feel good in general, not like in the moment, but what seems to promote their health in general. I think that's a reasonably good guide. Obviously, not without some caveats, but eat what makes them feel good and feel better in their lives. And I also think that in the absence of clear, conclusive evidence, that doctors should be very slow to prescribe eating plans. When like, I'm not necessarily talking
Eating
about like
plans or plants.
Plans.
No T.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not saying. Yeah. No. Doctors should be slow in prescribing. Like, hey, you've got to get completely off of this and do this.
Uh-huh.
The problem is doctors want to be part of the solution. They want to intervene. And sometimes there's not enough evidence to intervene. Now, things like, okay, if somebody comes in and says, I'm drinking 4 gallons of Gatorade a day, or, you'd probably be like, well, we're pretty sure that much sugar is not going to get you where you want to go. Yeah. So there are certain things that we're fairly clear on, but I think that there has been too much aggressiveness in the medical community to tell people what to eat and what not to eat in the absence of compelling data from my perspective. So that being said, let me kick it to you, Joel, and tell me sort of some of your history with this and how you've arrived at what you think is true about diet today.
Yeah, so up until I was about 29, 30, I just ate like everyone I knew growing. I grew up in a suburb of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I would like to eat out nice was to go to Red Lobster. There was a Lone Star Steakhouse, and I used to love to eat their $10 steaks over there. And so I grew up just eating kind of whatever tasted good to me. The more sour cream and butter you can put on it. Even today, I love me a baked potato with sour cream and butter on it. And so, in those kind of perspectives, I just want to say where I'm kind of coming from. And I used to just roll my eyes at a lot of these different diet things. I remember when I used to be pastor, it irked me to no degree when people are like, I have an allergy to gluten. And I'm like, oh yeah, what happens? They're like, it makes me feel lethargic. I'm like, that's what gluten does to fucking everybody, okay? Gluten makes you feel lethargic. What do you mean I'm allergic to it? But I think it was about 2015, 2016, in my early 30s, a buddy of mine told me about this thing that he does. It's like a 21-day purification done by this company called The Standard Process. And what it basically does, it has some pills and some shake stuff, but it's all like ground asparagus and Brussels sprouts and all these very fibrous and high in nutrition kinds of things. And the diet is basically this: the first 11 days, you basically eat vegan plus, meaning you're eating nothing that a vegan wouldn't eat, but also you're not eating bread, you're not eating white potatoes, you're not eating basically any processed foods. You're avoiding all processed food. It's all vegetables and fruits, and half of those vegetables and fruits need to be raw. And then you can add in some lentils. I think you could add in, and they wouldn't even let you eat chickpeas, but I always cheated with hummus. But on day 12, you could add in a serving of fish, and they wanted it to be deep sea fish, so it wasn't like tilapia grown in these fish farms. And it was and they were like, they preferred you to, if you ate meat, that it would be game, like a deer or something that was not like grown in a farm. They're just trying to get out all the different things that are factories add in. And basically the idea was, and it made sense to my brain, we're going to only put in your body the most easily digestible things that your body just knows how to digest and can do so quickly. And what that's going to do is going to make your digestive system work less hard. You don't drink alcohol, you don't drink milk, you don't do any of those things. And anything that might have built up over time in your intestines can get flushed out. And I heard a chiropractor say, you'll know it's working when you're pooping the shape of your intestines. Basically, you're pooping snakes. And I remember the first time I sat down, and it was like maybe 5 days into the purification, the first time I did it, and I had the longest fucking turd come out of my rear end. Like 3 seconds in, I started laughing on the toilet, just going, oh my God, what is happening? It's still going. And so anyways, This is the podcast of TMI. So I know for me, I have experience with moving, and it only up until that point, I had never really experimented with anything vegetarian. I didn't know what it meant to cook vegetarian, and I learned a bunch of new recipes. And since then, I've done this purification multiple times. I also did a similar, even stricter diet with something called the dieta when I did ayahuasca one time, and that was a 2-week process. They wouldn't even let you eat like peppers and in tomatoes and things that had a certain kind of enzyme in it. And so for me, I have experimented a lot with vegetarianism. I'm married to a vegetarian. My wife is Indian, specifically from the area of Gujarat, which is 60% vegetarian. That's in their culture. It's not only just tied to their culture, it's tied to a lot of kind of religious beliefs around that as well. And so that impacts the food that I eat on a daily basis, what we cook in the home. And I don't eat vegetarian all the time, but it impacts me a lot. And I've read exactly one book about diet. It's called Eat to Live by Dr. Joel Fuhrman. And this was my doctor. When I turned 40, I told him, hey, what do you got around diet? Because I come from a family that has some high cholesterol, high blood pressure kind of history. And mine was kind of inching up there, even though I'm pretty slender build. And so he gave me this book. And it was filled with a lot of, an MD that's quoting a lot of these trials and these tests. And I'm going to have a different perspective than you, Trent, on question. I do believe questioning some of these datas, but like this is why we have peer-reviewed journals. This is why some studies are more legitimate and more trustworthy than other studies, and there are some things that are more reliable. Like, I'm not trying to argue if eggs are good for you or bad for you. That goes back and forth across our lifespan. We've seen that flip flop. But his whole question is, what makes people live longer? What reduces disease in the long term? And there's been a ton of studies over decades around various things that lead to cancer, that don't lead to cancer, to primarily heart disease, which leads to death. And so this book that he wrote is about helping people in really bad positions in their body and helping get to a healthier place. Primarily what he argues is all the data shows thinner people live longer. And that's just a fact. And so what do you do with that kind of information? And so I'll be referring to some of that that I read in the book. Okay. Data points. Trent, you meathead. You conscienceless killer of sentient mammals. Why do you think the carnivorous diet is better?
Yes. So, okay. Well, points of clarity here. So, yeah. So, a carnivore, like if you're going to say, for instance, if you say I am on a carnivore diet, probably you should only say that if you are eating like 100% animal products, right?
So not even the paleo diet.
Yeah, I mean paleos they're eating plants, right? So, but when if I say like a kind of a, let's say, animal based, right? Predominantly animal foods is mainly how I try to eat. I do think that there are some good reasons to think that it might be better for you than a vegetarian diet. Let me make a few. Here's some kind of fun ones, but I've got several points to make here. The first one is, does anybody get cravings for meat-based tofu? So in the past 10 years, we have Impossible burgers, we have like soy bacon, we have fake cheese, we have milk from almonds and cashews. So all of these attempts to make to take non-animal ingredients to produce a facsimile of that animal product so that vegetarians can keep enjoying their meals. That's something I think is really interesting. Is there's something to that if our bodies seem to be craving something and we're trying to replicate that without the sort of core ingredients that made it that in the first place, what's the reason for that? Nobody's ever walked into a restaurant that I know of and like into an Asian restaurant. So, I'd like a big block of tofu. And if you could, I want it to taste exactly like tofu, but I don't want it to be made of tofu. I want it to be made of meat. Like that does not happen. And part of the reason is not a lot of people find that they get cravings for tofu. Most people. I think then, so that doesn't suggest that you ought to only follow your cravings. Obviously, there are reasons, let's say that human beings crave sugar, and reasons why we kind of want sugar, because it is when you're out in the wild and you come across something that's sweet and you need calories, like Sean Baker says, we're opportunistic eaters, and so we're going to get in an environment not like the one we have today, but 10,000, 20,000 years ago. You're going to eat what's in your environment. Beggars can't be choosers. You're generally speaking, unless you're in a place of abundance, you're not going to have as many choices, and so there are reasons why we get cravings. So I'm not trying to make a. You have a question?
I have a point of order in this.
Yes.
I'm going to argue with you for a little bit because I know you have other points to make. So, first of all, I don't think that's what's happening at all. I don't think we are craving these things. I think we have adapted to what our environment has taught us to crave. I say that because when I my ayahuasca thing, the guy that was the shaman over it, he talked about how he only eats this like very strict diet, and he was talking, and I was like asking him, like, well, what? He came from a food industry. His parents owned restaurants, and he talked about how much salt everyone puts in, restaurants in particular put into everything because it just makes everything taste like a lot, and then you're just thirsty. Sure. He says, I'll eat a restaurant, I'm thirsty for a week. But he says when he studied down in Peru, and he had to be on the dieta for a while. After about a month, a cucumber, he said, I tasted it and my mouth exploded. It was just like,
Sure. Okay.
He adapted to it. And so I would say, like, I have been living in this world of vegetarianism, and sometimes I crave tofu. I do crave it because I've had it made very well. I know what it tastes like when it's done really well. And then I would argue that, like, the fact that we crave, and you made this point, but the fact that we crave sugar is biologically kind of in us. And like Gabor Mate in his book, The Myth of Normal, has a whole chapter on this conspiracy theory, basically, of the food industry props up sugar as a way to sell everything, even though they know it's bad for us. It's like putting fucking crack in food. Of course, it's going to like create cravings.
Yeah.
It gets into your brain. You're like, I gotta have more of that, and it's not good for you. So that point, I'm gonna push aside as stupid and unheard of, and I will not support it.
Well, I do want to pin also, and it's something we will come back to, I think. I want to also clarify too, when you just said like the sugar, it's not good for you. I think here we want to go into some detail later on about dosages, because I think very few people would argue if you have a teaspoon of sugar once a week that's going to derail your life and your diet.
Yeah.
I think some of these things get demonized sometimes. And we'll come back to that. I think the dosage thing is a really important point to make. Okay. All right. The next point I want to make is, farming at scale represents only a portion or maybe a fraction of our time as a distinct species. We don't know everything. Let's say that human beings as a separate species been around for 200,000 years. We think that, roughly speaking, agriculture kind of became mainstream about 10,000 years ago. The studies that I have done have shown that human beings were eating plant foods before then, and also experimenting with farming practices, taking it on for a while and maybe dropping it, when they were tired of it or whatever. There's back and forths with it. But I don't think there's evidence that through the entire existence, probably a fraction of our existence, have we been farming at scale and eating plant foods derived from that. So there are people groups today who survive and thrive on animal foods, and other groups who do eat a lot of plant foods. Depending on, and this is today, but this would apply through, I mean, we have significant evidence from the archaeological and anthropological record that human beings we are omnivorous, okay? Not debatable. We have been eating plants and animals for thousands upon thousands of years. Now, where a people group, so this idea, there a lot of times this will be bandied about that sort of there's this imaginary, hypothetical hunter-gatherer group that was around, in some sort of made-up environment for about 150,000 years, and they just
CrossFit.
ate one thing. CrossFit. and the reality is we have occupied so many different habitats, and as a result we've eaten different things. So there are people who have been in environments where plant foods are much more plentiful, and other peoples where they're only available seasonally. And then think about like the Inuit peoples in the Arctic region who have very, very little access to plant foods, and yet have shown remarkable levels of health. The Maasai people in Africa, who are eating a predominantly meat-based and milk and blood diet, show remarkably good levels of health as well. So I think that what I wanted to say is particular locales would have offered like I just said, little edible vegetation, but would have had ample animal food. So I think the argument is not that I can show a period of time a long period of time, maybe from our origin, where we're eating only meat. But my question is, and this is, so maybe you can parse this when you talk, Joel, is there is a difference between veganism and vegetarianism. And what I would say to anybody who, and again, you may not be making this claim, I don't know, but if someone is making the claim that we ought to steer as far away, like sort of the optimal diet would be almost no animal foods or maybe no animal foods, the only problem that one of the things I would show with that, A, I don't think you have clinical evidence to support that that's true, but B, when you survey every people group that's ever existed that we know about, as far as I understand, you don't find one single group that has survived and thrived off of an exclusively plant-eating diet.
Sure.
So you would need to be able, if you were making that claim, I think it would be important to do that. Now, here, let me say this too. It could be the case that human beings have been eating for thousands upon thousands of years foods that are suboptimal for them. I think that's extremely unlikely, but I would concede that could be true. Go ahead.
All right, I'm gonna come at you counter. I do think some of what I'm gonna say is overlapping with what you're saying, because you are agreeing with something I read in Dr. Joel Furman's book, where he says, yeah, when you look at our ancestors, there are people groups that ate mostly meat, and there are people groups that ate mostly plants, and that was highly dependent upon their environment. And of course, if you go back 10,000 years, you're talking about survival. This isn't about options. This is about what calories could they find, and over thousands of years, bodies adapt and evolve. But just because, and you just said it doesn't mean it's optimal. It may be suboptimal. Like a dog on the street finds a way to survive by eating shit. Just trash and nastiness. I mean, I have a dog who gets good food that we give her, and she still eats crap whenever she can find a time, because she doesn't have a full brain. And so, to me, the argument will be what it really rests on. Now that we have opportunity to eat a lot of things, and I want to be fair here, because there are a lot of arguments too about what's your socioeconomic status. And, where do you live? You might live in what's called a food desert, where you actually don't have great access to fresh fruits and vegetables. You might not have great access to things that aren't processed. And there is plenty of research to show that processed foods over the course of time do have a deleterious effect on your digestive system and help contribute to disease. There's plenty of research around that. And so I'm going to argue that because, looking back is not a helpful argument, because it doesn't all it really tells us is how these people learned to survive. It doesn't tell us what is really best for those of us who aren't living in a isolated environment where we only have three options to eat.
The rebuttal I would offer to that is, based upon what I know about evolution, if you could show, if it was possible to show that human beings were existing mostly on animal foods in most places for most of our evolutionary history, it would be very strange if the argument was being made that animal foods are essentially bad for us. It would be very strange that human beings would not have adapted over millennia to eating these kinds of foods. That would be very abnormal, and suddenly then to be given a more optimal diet. It seems like there would have been much more susceptibility to disease, to pregnancies that went bad, and all kinds of things if you were consistently eating a suboptimal diet. That seems a reasonable.
Parse it
and
out.
Again, I'm not
You
making
used
the
two
argument
words
here.
there. You said, is it bad for you? Is it suboptimal? I don't think those are the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. Sure. No. But with respect to animal foods, there are vegetarians and vegans who would say they're bad for you, that they are
Sure.
deleterious to your health. So if human beings were eating a lot of animal foods, and in some instances maybe almost exclusively them, and those were bad for them, it does seem unreasonable to me to suggest that we would have survived as we have and thrived when that was the condition. Okay, last point I want to make is this. I don't know. I'm actually not here to argue, to advocate a carnivore diet. I don't know if a mostly carnivore diet is superior. And the reason is, how could anyone know that? There are health or wellness or well-being depends upon many factors that are well established. Diet is one of them. Sleep, quality sleep is another. Stress reduction is another. Communal life, sexual frequency, living with a purpose, strenuous exercise, the list goes on. These are all contributing factors to living a so-called healthy lifestyle. Now, again, if you are going to try to demonstrate that a particular food item or a particular style of eating is superior to another, in my opinion, you have to do more than rely upon epidemiological and observational studies. You have to rely upon, and I can go into those if you want me to, but you really need to be able to track, to have two groups of people that are randomized, in which one group is not just eating like, one group is like eating only meats, and the other group is eating like only plant foods, and then compare those and control all other variables. We're not talking about like for a year. We're talking about for a long period of time, because of the cumulative effect that also might be in play when it comes to what you're putting in your body. And it's almost impossible to do those studies. When you do observational studies, they'll send out, like, it's food questionnaires and what have you been eating the last 3 weeks and stuff. First of all, people tend not to remember super well. Secondly, these studies are susceptible, these observational studies where you're just gathering information on people's lives, they're susceptible to so many confounding factors. I'll give one example, and then I'm going to kick it to you. One example is the accusation, for instance, that like eating lots of red meat can cause clogged arteries, which can then cause more heart attack risk. One of the problems with that is there are people who are called like non-compliers. So the person who goes to the doctor's office and the doctor says, you need to stop eating hamburgers. These are also the people who are more likely to not be exercising, because that would be complying with the doctor. There are people who are more likely to be smoking. There are people who are more likely to have probably high stress lifestyle. They're not reading diet books and they're not paying attention to the doctor. So if you have that group compared to the group that is, say, eating lots of vegetables, maybe eating a plant-based diet, also getting lots of sleep, also having lots of sex, also lowering their stress, exercise, all these kinds of things, tell me how you're able to narrow it down to the food is causing that. I've always had that question. So, Joel,
I
do
think
you
it's a
have
great
anything to say
question.
to?
I think it's a great question. I think it's a fair observation to say that, to make that argument as if this is like the silver bullet that overcomes all these other things is, I agree with you, ridiculous. You're not going to overcome, go from a sedentary, obese life where there's mental health issues and stress and all kinds of sleep issues that they're all kind of intertwined, like health issues and sleep issues and stress issues and personal feelings in mental health around depression or anxiety. All these things, they all compound on each other, and it is a web. And so you're not gonna be able to say if you just change your diet that'll change everything. I agree. You got to take an approach at all of it. But if you like had a person who was good at all of those except diet, I think the point is, if that person changed their diet, would it improve their organs? That's where the point is to me, that where some of these studies could bring out some truth. Not saying that that change would overcome all the other things, but the argument, I'm just trying to look at one slice of the pie and go like, hey, in this slice of the pie, what is optimal and what isn't?
See, that's not the point. The point that I was making is it may be very well true that what you eat is enormously important, but when you have confounding factors like that, it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to identify and isolate a single cause that's contributing to a negative health outcome.
Sure. I mean, I don't think I can be a prick about arguing with you about that. Okay, let me make a point that I read in the book that I found really compelling. And so, again, this is this word health. What does health mean? I think we are looking at a big pie that many in the Western world boil down to physical health. And that is a misnomer. I would agree that you cannot really look at health when we're only looking at cholesterol and blood pressure and pulse and temperature. That is like, someone could be peak and all those things, in my opinion, not be a healthy person based upon the stress that they have or the people that they're harming with because they don't, they might be a narcissist or something of that sort. I would not call that a healthy person, regardless of the state of their body. So I want to like qualify this. Dr. Joel Furman makes the argument. He uses this little, I like it when people create like math problems to offer their their solution. So he says H health equals N divided by C, N over C, and it's nutrition over calories. And what he's arguing is basically the more nutrition that we can pack into our calories, meaning that if you eat a bunch of food that has high caloric intake but less nutrition, your stomach is filled more, and so you begin to eat less, or your body keeps wanting to eat more because you want more nutrition, and you end up getting overweight, and so you end up getting more calories and less nutrition. The more nutrition you get in there, you fill your stomach up with broccoli and kale. It's going to take a little bit longer because they're lower in calories, but they're going to offer higher nutrition. And so it makes total sense for me, because from his perspective, longer life and minimizing disease are the goals to measure like what we eat. If we're trying to look at why does it matter we eat this thing or this thing, what is the goal? And for me, I also agree with living my life. I agree with enjoying the food that I eat to the best that I can. But I also think that enjoying my food to the best that I can is a psychological experiment. I can trick myself into liking things that I didn't like a year ago. That has happened to me multiple times in my life through just sheer practice and following and trusting some other people who know how to like learn the craft to make tofu taste good, or they've learned the craft of creating pasta with spaghetti squash and making a dish. Now, to go back to your argument about why do we do this thing where we have all these weird vegan and vegetarian options of carnivorous diets. We have the Impossible Burger. The reason that's happening and the reason it's craving is not because we have like a biological need to eat that, is because we grew up in environments that told us this is what is yummy. We grew up in environments with 1,000 commercials that tell us that Burger King and McDonald's and all these, this is what's yummy. This is what, a good burger. This, when you go out and you do community, which is another thing of health, we're going to do a barbecue and there's going to be burgers. There's going to be hot dogs with all kinds of crazy shit in those hot dogs. But it doesn't matter because this is a good time. And so I think what's actually happening there is a more psychological pressure that's being put on us to eat these things. And that's why vegans and vegetarians look for these opportunities to create similar connections with those things that happen earlier in their lives or the messages that they receive from their culture that then meet and align with their dietary values.
So can I say something here?
You can.
Am I welcome to? I don't think I think that I like the formula that you say, the equation of health equals nutrition divided by calories. I don't think this would rebut a carnivore diet claim. In fact, probably this is where vegetarians and carnivore people would agree, to the extent that, like, Mark Hyman, who's not a carnivore advocate as far as I know, Mark Hyman talks about the SAD diet, the standard American diet, which is high in sugars and processed foods, which is low in fruits and vegetables and these kinds of things. But a carnivorous person wouldn't be advocating for processed foods. A carnivorous person who's eating a full carnivore diet would never eat carnivorous foods. And I don't know if you're aware of, when you eat a piece of beef, that thing is loaded with nutrients. Loaded. Beef has lots of B12, has selenium, high amounts of zinc, iron, choline, riboflavin. I believe I might be missing some other stuff. And then obviously one of the primary, if not probably the primary macronutrient, protein. It's obviously loaded with protein. So that doesn't rebut a carnivore diet. It does. I do agree that it refutes the notion that you can survive and thrive off of highly processed foods that are high in sugar and simple carbohydrates and stuff. But I don't think that establishes necessarily that vegetarianism trumps carnivorous eating.
And I don't disagree that meat does have nutrients. It, of course, does. It does. And if we're looking at the SAD, the standard American diet, I do not think most people live in a conscious kind of eating world around meat. Most people don't. And it's fair to even throw that at some of these, what I would call, vegan to the appearance, the veneer of veganism. It is so cool. Look at me and how ethically conscious I am. The goal of eating food is not to impress people. The goal of eating food is how to live an optimal life. How can I, like you said, feel more energy, sleep better, and reduce disease, mitigate disease, and improve other things in my body that it wants. That's the goal. So I'm not arguing that meat is bad. I'm not. I'm trying to make the argument that meat is less good. That's what I'm trying to make. The argument is meat is less good. So I remember, do you ever read the comic Bizarro?
I'm familiar with it. I haven't read it. No.
So I could be wrong here. I probably shouldn't even say it, but I'm going to. I heard that the illustrator for that and the creator of Bizarro is from Tulsa. May or may not be true. I don't know. But an amazing comic. And I remember one that really stuck in my mind years ago. And this was before I really got into vegetarianism. In fact, I read the comic and it made me angry because at the time I saw vegetarianism as stupid. But it had this little meerkat looking up at a gorilla and saying, "You're telling me you only eat vegetables? Where do you get all your protein?" That was the line.
Right.
Where do you get all your protein? And the truth is that vegetables and fruit have tons of protein, more than we need, if you eat in a way that is intentional. You eat spinach is great. It has so much of these things that you need. Soy products are great. They have so much of this that you need. And but I remember back then when I was still in my vegetarian hating stage, my brain was like, well, what if it was I don't know, some herbivore looking at a lion going, "What do you mean you only eat meat? Where do you get all your fiber and nutrients?" That was kind of where my brain went. Well, in this
Well,
book, one final thing, in this book, there's a whole chapter. It's titled by Dr. Joel Fuhrman. It's called "The Lion is Made of Grass." And what he tries to argue is that the lion is eating meat, but he or she is eating meat of animals that are entirely herbivores. We forget giraffes, gorillas, rhinos, all these massive mammals, they eat only vegetables. And they're big and fat and huge. So the argument, and again, this is a strawman argument, but I'm going to bring it up. The argument that I hear from the carnivores is that you don't get enough protein. You don't get enough protein. You don't, and it's just like meathead. I'm just, I don't get enough protein. I'm just like, absolutely. A gorilla would pull your arm off with its pinky and its thumb, and that, you big meathead, right? And it's eating
Yeah.
it's eating only fruits and veggies, right? Stop it.
Well, no, I wouldn't make that argument. But listen, the stomach, the chemical capacity and abilities of animals to convert certain kinds of food substances into the things that they need. We have different stomachs. Cows have two stomachs. Gorillas will probably spend, I don't know how many hours it is each day. I think it's well over 10 hours eating, because they're eating plants and they require that amount of time to do all of that digestion. We've evolved. I mean, we in appearance have some similarities to gorillas, but in terms of what we're able to eat, it's completely different. So yeah, and I don't think that eating meat makes you strong like a gorilla. Yeah, a gorilla would destroy the world's strongest man. Probably 100-pound chimpanzee would destroy the world's strongest man. So that's a certainty. Now, I would say this: are you aware of the recommended daily allowance of the governmental RDA for protein?
I'm sure I've read it multiple times, but I can't say it at the top of my head.
So right now, the last time I checked, it was 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So for a person like me, I'm probably 100 kilos. So for me, and this is probably on the low.
Where are you from? Metric system. Oh my gosh.
So they I mean, and they're probably, my feelings are probably on the low end. This is just what they recommend to make sure that you don't fall into a disease state. That would mean that I would need to eat 80 grams of protein. Now, to reach that. Now I don't think that you can only get protein from animal sources. You can get protein from plant sources, of course. Now, that being said, the most likely candidates for getting the right amount of protein in a vegetarian or vegan diet would be beans, legumes, lentils, soybean. If you were going to try to get the RDA of protein from cruciferous vegetables, you'd never get there. I mean, to eat enough kale to be able to cover that daily amount, I would have to probably eat several 5-gallon containers of kale. You just wouldn't get there. I'm not saying that kale's unhealthy.
But if you lost weight, you'd need less.
Okay, so if you were 60 kilos, which is probably 140 pounds or something like that, you would still, if you're 60 kilos, you would need 50 grams of protein. Again, to get there, this is a point that I'm making that's kind of bleeding over into what we're going to get to, but I'm not just disputing that you can. I think you can get your protein intake from a vegetarian diet. But this idea, when someone says that, let's say, a kale salad is more nutritious and healthy than a filet mignon or a ribeye, it's like, if you were stranded on let's just make this clear. If you were stranded on a desert island and you had the choice between hot dogs, an endless supply of hot dogs, or kale, you would choose hot dogs because you would die eating kale. You would never get enough calories. You would go into a caloric deficit trying to get calories because your body would spend so much. I think a thing of kale has almost no calories. I'm not saying it's not healthy. I'm not saying it can't provide nutrients, but the point needs to be made here. One of the reasons that we eat is to stay alive. We need calories to stay alive. You cannot get enough calories from cruciferous vegetables or leafy greens. They have
I'm a fan of the island argument, because that's where we all really live, on an island, only having to choose between hot dogs and kale, versus actually living in the country where most people are overweight and obese. That's not the problem or the conversation I'm trying to have.
Let me ask you this: how much kale? How much? Nicely done. You got me. Okay, fuck you. All right. Okay. All right. Did you have any more points to make on your?
No, man. I'm just trying to be a jerk.
I saw that. That was good. That was well played. I thought it was fully real. All right. Good.
All right. So. Tell me, Trent, I mean, you've kind of talked about this, and we've allowed this conversation to go along, so we might have to skip some of what we've talked about.
It's just racing by. I mean, I haven't felt that time, but yeah, we're getting far.
Let's go ahead and skip to the end here, man. Like,
sure.
I want to share some things that, things that you've talked about that I liked. Because I do think, Trent, you and I talked about, let's model for people how to have a healthy debate. We even talked about like debate versus discussion. Talk about that a little bit real quick.
Yeah. I think that debate, it's a healthy part of our society, but it generally connotes a competitive environment in which there's a winner and a loser. And to the extent that I think a debate should result in greater knowledge for everybody involved, there can be no winners and losers. If you sort of quote unquote lost, then you learned more, and if you won, you need to really sort of make sure that you feel like you really know what you're talking about. But I think that a discussion is better in the sense that we're both here trying to learn from each other, assuming that we're going to learn things, and trying to grow our own knowledge. And so I don't necessarily. Sometimes when I enjoy watching debates, but from many of the debates that I've watched, it's clear that the people aren't really listening to each other, and they're not willing. They've got so much ego; they're not willing to concede a point that's well made. Yeah, and I don't like that. Sure. I think you should have confidence, and if you know something, have confidence. Don't back down from it. You and I both have things that we feel confident about, and like we back down from them. But listen and assume that you could be wrong. Because I even noticed, like, during this debate, there's times when sort of my blood pressure rises because I'm like, something's being challenged. I don't like that feeling, and it's fun to sort of pay attention to that. So
sure. So with that kind of heart in mind, yeah. I wanna start by making a couple points of things that I thought you said that were good.
Yeah.
And I liked, and I'll give you the opportunity as well, and then we'll end with a final question that I would love for you to answer. So, for me, some of the points you made that I actually vibed with, and for the sake of creating an interesting podcast, didn't just go, "Yep, I agree. Yep, I agree." Was that a lot of studies do offer conclusions that are questionable. Because and this is where I did bring up peer-reviewed journals. The purpose of that is so that other people will poke holes in these studies and find the best data. And it takes time for that to happen. And there's a whole another science to doing these kinds of studies, and there are people who do this for a living, trying to find the most accurate research. And you made a great point to question questionable research. And sometimes when we live in the world that we live in, data is cited without any asterisks or any pointing back to any actual studies. We don't get the resources where these things are come from. We just get a blogger who heard another blogger talk about something they blogged about. And it's kind of like when we used to be in church and you hear a pastor make a reference to some sort of statistic, and I knew these pastors. They weren't researchers. They didn't know what the fuck they were talking about most of the time. Right? They just heard someone else say it and then now said it from a place of authority. And that happens a lot in our society. And I do agree that when it comes down to food, that happens quite a lot. And people follow really crazy, weird diets, and they end up being attracted to the information that they already agree with. And so, yes, I agree with that. And then you started talking a little bit about farming at scale represents only a portion, maybe a fraction of our time as a distinct species. And you started talking about how we as ancient humanity were raised and grew. And you made the point that if meat was bad for us, it would have had effects. This wouldn't have been something we continued to adapt to and continued to having children with and all those. And to that, I completely agree. This is why I am not I still eat meat. In my perspective is that it isn't bad, but I am very interested in for whatever reason, I lean towards the people who advocate for vegetarianism because I'm interested in that as a way for my own body, my own constitution. I found that to be very helpful. And so because of that, I lean towards that and I read more to that. And I thought it was kind of cool that you said that one of the books that influenced you was an Ayurvedic book that, my wife Poonam has a history with Ayurvedic, which comes from the Indian culture, and I've learned a lot about that, and the systems and the philosophies behind that I find very fascinating. And so that's where I'm kind of coming from there, and I thought you made some good points about that.
Well, I think something I appreciate about your take is it's clear that you take health seriously, that it's something that can be fought for and can be planned for. And I think that, something I would say about people who maybe self-describe vegetarian or vegan is they are, and then I would also say this about carnivorous people, to the extent that they're being conscious and not taking the propaganda of commercials and all that shit and billboards. They're thinking about what they're eating. Those people are probably on a better track and probably going to end up in a better place than, just as an example, the person who shows up as significantly obese, not exercising at all. I mean, we all know where they had lunch today. We know what's been in their meals. It's been probably a lot of processed junk food. And I think vegetarianism is strong in that they're guiding people consciously away from those and towards foods that are going to maximize their health. I think I also like when you talk about the health, I'd never heard of that before, but health is nutrition divided by calories. I think that's a very good way to think about it. And I think that's right on. And also the point about reducing your body weight, a lower body weight, a lower BMI points towards longevity. And so I think that's a true point as well. So and good spirit of the debate. Solid attitude. Man. Congenial. Mr. Congeniality Award.
Man, I don't know. This is kind of fun for me.
Yeah.
When you said your heart rate rose, I was like, uh-oh. Maybe I was putting on the acting face a little too well, but
No, that's fine. No, hey, listen, I can bring it. That's why, I love doing this stuff. And we burned an hour. I didn't even notice it because I really enjoy the back and forth. I mean, I like some of the competitiveness, and I like coming to a debate and seeing if my points will hold up or whatever. So
I wanna make one point, and then I'm gonna ask you a final question for us to close,
Sure.
Trent. The point I want to make: this food debate is super sensitive for a lot of people, and maybe some people that are sensitive to this would have turned it off already. But I just want to make it just to put it out there. There is nothing about food that we're talking about that is trying to shame anyone.
No.
Any more than I know people, and I know people who are addicted to alcohol. I know people who struggle with all kinds of substances that impact our body. We like the effect that it does to us, whether it's caffeine or cocaine, whatever it may be. We end up finding that as a coping mechanism, and food is a coping mechanism for a lot of people. And there's a system at play that actually is not for your health. It's for the system's perpetuity. There it is. Perpetuation. There it is. We got there.
Yeah.
The system is there to make itself continue to exist, and by making enough money make a lot of money. And there's a lot of people, specifically if you have a lower income, accessibility to good food is difficult. It is not easy. And so for people who shame people in those spaces, I just want to say, try some compassion. People are genuinely doing the best they can. And there are others who have a lot of trauma in their past. And this is the way that they have learned to kind of get to where they are in life. And so this conversation is not about all of those other things. We're looking at this slice of the pie and the debate within that pie. So, Trent, with that being said, do you want to add to that?
Just quickly, that when I did talk about obesity, I mean, obesity would have been unthinkable 50,000 years ago.
Sure.
You just not have, you almost certainly, in most instances, you would have not had that much accessibility, and your survival would have required great amounts of movement almost on a daily basis. So we have a disgustingly sick, sort of in accordance with Gabor Mate's assessment, the myth of normal. We have a disgustingly abnormal, unsuitable environment for human beings. And that produces conditions where it's a lot easier to be overweight and unhealthy.
Yep. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Lots of compassion for anyone who's struggling with their weight. I just want to say the cards are stacked against you. I was just at lunch the other day and at my work, and we were all eating fajitas. I was eating chicken. And so one of the guys was like, "Joel, how do you stay so slender?" And I gave him an honest answer. Genetics is really the primary reason why I'm the build that I am.
Yeah.
Now, I do exercise, I do move, I could be more heavier, but I have to be honest, genetics is a primary factor for me. So how can I be proud of that? I didn't ask for that.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Trent, the final question I have for you is, why do you think there's so much controversy about food and diets?
Well, a couple reasons. I think that people want to be reassured in the kind of diet that they've chosen, and if that gets challenged, they've been eating a certain way for a long time. They feel like maybe it's the right way, and someone else comes along and say maybe it's not the right way. That can be upsetting. I think also people, food is in some culture, well, in all cultures, there's certain things that are sacred. Mealtime can be sacred. Like what we eat is very, very important. It's the building blocks of our life. And also, people also want their loved ones to be as healthy as possible, and so they are going to get their own ideas about what that should be for the people that they care about. And maybe the people they care about is their whole society. There are people who are vegetarians, vegans, pescatarians, carnivore, paleo, keto, wherever, who care about the health of people. And And then there are the fucking food lobbyists, and then that's a separate species.
They care about a bigger bank
Fuck
account.
fuck Nabisco and goddamn Betty Crocker and whoever else. They can eat shit. Which is to say, eat their own food.
Exactly. They're serving it.
Yeah.
Man, much love to you, my friend.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that final note. Well said. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this contentious episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. We hope to see you next time.
Peace.